well as what I mentioned as well, that genocide has continued. So I don't think the only key to preventing and stopping genocide in the world is learning about the Holocaust. I think, we have to learn about other genocides as well, but I think one aspect, if we're going to learn anything, if we're going to respond, if we're going to ensure that the government takes action when we see genocide going on, we have to learn about what happened during the Holocaust. And we have to learn that the lack of action resulted in the enormity of what happened. So I don't think that there's a way to overteach it. I think there's always more to learn, and I think once you begin to learn about the Holocaust, you realize how much there is to learn, and how in many ways it can shape so many different aspects of other issues and other topics and connect it. So that's what I would say. I would ask first to think about those who perished.
And when you were in school,
Mm-hmm.
what was your Holocaust education like? What were you learning?
That's a great question. So I actually had, I would say, very little Holocaust education in sort of my K-12 years. I probably learned more because I'm Jewish, and I also went to Sunday school, and I had, in Sunday school, there was, films, and people would speak to us, and survivors would speak to us, and then I also had a personal connection as the grandchild of survivors, so kind of had that. But in my general education, I think we read the Diary of Anne Frank in maybe 6th grade, and spent a little bit of time on it, and otherwise, really, I would say only tangentially talked about it in relation to World War II, and less spent any focused time on the topic.
Tell me a little bit about your childhood, and did it lead you to pursue what you do now?
Sure. So that's a great question in terms of, did my childhood lead me to do this? And, in some ways I would say yes, and in some ways I would say no. I think that, having grandparents who are survivors, sort of growing up your whole life knowing that you had this connection to the Holocaust is, I'm sure, in many ways drew me to this work and to this field. However, that said, even with that background and with learning about it and being interested in it, I didn't say as a young person, this is what I want to spend my life doing. In high school, I actually wanted to be a doctor. But I think I also, as I went through college and kind of, learned more and grew more self-awareness, realized that I had this strong commitment to social justice and to issues of tolerance and equity and inclusion for all people, and saw some kind of injustice in my community in different places in those days, and really felt compelled to work towards greater levels of inclusion and tolerance. And so I think it wasn't inevitable from my childhood, but I think all of that kind of played a role into leading me into this field.
I read an article that sort of discussed this topic about you. There will come a day when there will be no survivors. And how do you think that will affect the Holocaust education?
I don't have a crystal ball, so, the reality is I don't exactly know. However, what I do know is that it will make our jobs even harder to ensure that the Holocaust is taught in a meaningful way when there are no longer survivors to share their stories. I think, we're witnessing a moment in history when we go from living history, right, from living memory, and these stories are still alive and we can hear them and ask questions. So it's living memory to history, like out of a textbook. And I think that shift is going to be very different and radical, and change the way Holocaust education is and does and has been. However, at the same time, I think that the topic itself, for those who have learned about it and been teaching about it, recognize even more so maybe without survivors that it needs to be taught, because people aren't going to randomly come in contact with a Holocaust survivor or somebody who experienced it, and therefore it's even more important to teach about and to learn about, because they're not here to share their stories.
How would you define justice?
Well, I think justice, a definition of justice. I'm thinking actually of a Jewish kind of idea, and when we give to charity, it's called tzedakah, and we call it tzedakah. And the root of the word for tzedakah is tzedek, which is actually justice. And I don't think that by any means giving charity equals justice, but I'm saying this because I think that the idea of caring about others and being engaged with others is, to me, what justice is about, right? Is to being able to see our brothers and sisters as ourselves, regardless of if they're Jewish, not Jewish, black, white. So to me, justice is very much about do people have equal access, and do people have the same rights as you and I, and if not, ensuring that that balance is found. That's kind of my definition of justice, which is probably nowhere near the actual Webster's definition of justice.
That's no problem. Would you please share an example of a justice or injustice, either from your life or that you've read about or seen from the Holocaust?
Sure. I mean, I think, the Holocaust gives us many examples of injustice, and, I think the most sort of poignant that we can think of when we think about the Holocaust is the treatment of children, and that, children as individuals who have hopes and dreams and fears, but haven't done anything in their lives yet to, deserve any kind of negative treatment or any way. And so, I think just the mass murder of the children during the Holocaust is certainly an injustice. I also see smaller things in our own communities today where, there was a case in Cincinnati, and I don't know why this comes to mind, but it does, probably about a year ago, where, and these things happen all the time, and sometimes we hear about it and sometimes we don't, but there was a case where there was a landlord who owned a building that had a pool, and so there were like apartments in the building, and the landlord posted a sign that said blacks couldn't use the pool. Now this is in 2011, this is happening. To me, that's an example of injustice, and like I said, I'm not even sure that most people were aware that even had happened. And so I think it happens more regularly than we're even aware of. So,
what advice would you give to me and my classmates with regard to how we should live our lives and ensure that injustices, like, for example, those in the Holocaust, never happen again?
So my advice would be to, speak up, and to, even when you see the smallest ounce of what you think is unfair or unjust or disrespectful to another individual or a human being, that you speak up, that we are not afraid to challenge one another, to confront one another in a positive, constructive way, obviously, but when somebody's not treated fairly or justly, whether it's in our own home or school or community, or on a large scale basis when it comes to genocide in the world. But I think it starts really small, and I think it starts with us being respectful to one another, and then being sensitive and aware of what's going on in the world on a larger level. But I think